Marcus Wilson from New Jersey is not the kind of person who posts paranormal content online. His account is barely active at all. A few random videos shared with family and friends, nothing that would suggest someone with any interest in chasing that kind of attention. Which is exactly what makes the footage he uploaded on May 1st, 2026, so difficult to dismiss in the way you might dismiss content from someone who had built their entire presence around this kind of material. Marcus was out doing Uber Eats deliveries that night, moving through the streets of New Jersey the way he presumably does on any other shift, with his dashcam running and his phone nearby. He had no particular reason to be paying attention to anything beyond the next address on his screen. Then he made a right turn that brought a large cemetery into view along the roadside, and whatever the night had been holding in reserve apparently decided that was the right moment to make itself known. Marcus didn't notice what his dashcam captured at that turn until he reviewed the footage later. With his car windows completely rolled up, an apparition moves across the frame from right to left, passing directly in front of his face at a speed that explains why he didn't register it in real time. It is there, and then it isn't, crossing the screen with the kind of velocity that the eye processes as a blur rather than a shape, until the footage is slowed down enough to see it clearly. Later in the same shift, his car window began vibrating in a way he couldn't account for, and he got his phone out to film it and try to explain what he was feeling. While pointing the camera toward the window, something outside on the street caught his attention. A lone shoe sitting on top of a cardboard box, moving on its own. He got out of the car and filmed it up close, and the footage shows clearly that there is nothing attached to the shoe and nothing near it that could account for the movement before it shifts a second time right in front of him. His reaction was the unfiltered kind that happens when the body responds before the mind has had time to construct a more composed version of itself. He got back into the car. The activity didn't stop. While he was recording the interior panel, something outside grabbed his door handle, not tapped it, not brushed against it, but pulled it with enough force to be clearly audible on the recording.
What the? Why?
He swung the camera toward the window immediately. The street was empty. Then the heavy car door swung fully open on its own, moving with the deliberate force of someone pulling it from outside to get in. Marcus left. Viewers who watched the footage pointed out something that stayed with them long after the video ended. When that door swung open, whatever had been outside had every opportunity to get in. And Marcus drove home without knowing whether the passenger seat behind him was as empty as it looked. Marcus left wondering whether something had followed him home, but not every encounter begins on an empty road. Sometimes, whatever's waiting arrives at your own front door. Melissa Cottrell is not someone who goes looking for attention online. Her Instagram page is dedicated entirely to her family life and her knitting projects, the kind of quiet, personal account that exists for sharing moments with people who already know you rather than building an audience of strangers. So when a piece of security footage she posted to that page accumulated almost 2 million views in a short period of time, it wasn't because she had done anything to push it there. It spread on its own, carried by the reaction of people who watched it and found themselves unable to explain what they were looking at. Melissa explained the context clearly when she posted the footage. On March 3rd, at exactly 12:50 in the morning, a massive and completely unexplained boom shook her house hard enough to send her animals into immediate panic. The sound had no obvious source, no storm, no collision, nothing in the surrounding environment that she could point to as a cause. Seconds after the boom, her phone buzzed with a notification from her security camera. It had detected a human presence outside the house. She pulled up the live feed to see what the camera had found. What the camera had flagged as human was not anything she recognized as human. The footage shows something outside her home that resists description in any conventional terms. An unidentifiable mass shifts violently between three distinct locations in a matter of milliseconds, not moving between those points the way a physical object moves through space, but appearing, disappearing, and reappearing in a manner that has no mechanical or biological equivalent that most people watching it could name. The shape of the thing is completely distorted throughout, erratic in a way that feels less like motion, and more like the footage itself is struggling to contain whatever it is trying to record. The detail that pushed the footage from unsettling to genuinely disturbing came from viewers who took the time to go through it frame by frame. When the footage is paused at precisely the right millisecond within the blur of movement, something becomes visible inside the distorted mass that nobody watching casually would catch on a first viewing. The unmistakable shape of a skull, so clear once it has been pointed out that it becomes impossible to unsee when the footage is reviewed again. The internet divided immediately and has stayed divided. One camp points to the boom, the teleporting movement, and the camera's own confusion about what it was detecting as evidence of something aerial and unknown, a craft, an anomaly, or a genuine glitch in the fabric of what most people consider normal reality. The other camp looks at the skull and arrives somewhere considerably darker, somewhere that has less to do with technology and more to do with what certain traditions have always been described as manifesting in the hours around midnight when the conditions are right. What Melissa's security camera detected outside her house at 12:50 in the morning has never been identified. The boom has never been explained. And the skull visible in the frozen frame of that footage has never been accounted for by anyone who has looked at it seriously. Melissa never discovered what her camera had captured that night. The next case begins with someone who wasn't searching for ghosts either, until an empty house started watching him back. The TikTok account that posted this footage is not one built around paranormal content or ghost hunting or any of the other formats that populate that corner of the internet. It has 3 videos on it in total, belonging to a man who identifies himself as a professional real estate photographer, someone whose job involves moving through empty properties alone regularly, documenting spaces that are between owners or between occupants and houses that have been vacated and are waiting for whoever comes next. The first video on the account shows a door in a client's home opening and closing on its own, which generated some interest but not universal conviction. The kind of footage where the explanation and the paranormal interpretation feel roughly equally plausible and neither one wins decisively. It wasn't enough on its own to establish the account as something worth paying close attention to. Then he uploaded the footage from May 12th, 2026, and the conversation shifted. He had been inside an old vacant house shooting photographs for a client when he noticed, throughout the entire time he was working, a feeling that he was being watched. Not the vague unease that empty old houses produce in most people, but something specific and persistent enough that he mentioned it in the caption when he posted the footage. He had left a secondary camera running while he worked, not as a deliberate attempt to capture anything paranormal, but simply as part of his professional setup. And it was only when he reviewed that footage afterwards that he understood why the feeling had followed him through every room. The camera was positioned to capture the staircase, and what it recorded while the photographer was working in the property is the detail that has made this footage genuinely difficult to dismiss. He walks down the stairs and moves out of frame, his footsteps audible on the wooden steps as he descends. That part is straightforward. What happens immediately after is not the sound of footsteps on those same wooden stairs continues. Heavy, clear, and consistent with the sound of someone descending the staircase, occurring in the silence after the photographer has already left the frame and with nobody else visible anywhere in the shot. Then the shadow appears. A dark, solid shape moves down the staircase completely independently of any person or light source that could account for it. What makes it particularly compelling to anyone who has watched the footage carefully is the physical specificity of how it moves. The shadow doesn't float or drift across the wall in the way a light source moving outside a window might produce. It descends the stairs, and as it does, it passes directly behind the wooden spindles of the railing, interacting with the architecture of the staircase, the way a shadow cast by something physically present on those steps would interact with it. The photographer has posted nothing further about what he found on that footage, or whether he has returned to the property. The account remains at 3 videos, the staircase footage sitting there without any follow-up or explanation from the man who accidentally left his camera running in a house that apparently hadn't been as empty as it looked. Some strange encounters happen only once. Others refuse to stop. And for one family in England, the activity only became more aggressive with time. Glenn is a man from England whose TikTok account reads like a running document of a household that has been dealing with something persistent and increasingly difficult to live alongside. His videos cover a range of activities that have been building over time. Objects moving on their own, doors slamming shut with force, strange sounds moving through the hallways of his home at hours when the house should be quiet. For anyone who has followed the account from the beginning, the pattern is clear, and the escalation has been gradual enough to feel genuine rather than manufactured for an audience. But the video he uploaded on May 4th, 2026 represented something different from everything that had come before it. And the difference matters. Whatever had been operating inside his home had moved outside. Glenn was watching television when he noticed a cup had moved, shifted from where he had left it, in the way that objects in his home apparently move with enough regularity that he recognized it immediately, rather than questioning whether he had misremembered placing it. Before he had time to process that, his wife called him urgently into the kitchen. He brought the camera with him. Looking out the kitchen window into the yard, they watched one of their children's bicycles rolling slowly forward across the ground on its own. The yard was still. There was no wind event visible in the footage that could account for a bike moving with that kind of consistency, and the movement had the deliberate quality that distinguishes something being pushed from something drifting. Glenn made the decision to go outside and get closer to it, which is the kind of decision that most people watching the footage would not have made in the same situation. He approached the bike and filmed it from close range, moving around it to show clearly that there were no wires, no strings, and no mechanism attached to the frame that could explain what they had just watched it do from the window. He stood back from it and kept recording. The bike moved forward again. That alone would have been enough, but the detail that pushed the footage into territory that viewers found genuinely unnerving was what happened with the front wheel. It turned, not in a direction consistent with momentum or gravity on an uneven surface, but toward Glenn specifically, the wheel rotating to point directly at the man standing a few feet away filming it. The implication of that movement, the suggestion of awareness that it carried, was what landed most heavily with the people watching the footage after it was posted. The comments beneath the video reflected the seriousness with which many viewers took what they had seen. The recurring advice was consistent. Glenn needed to look into the history of his property to find out what had happened there before he and his family moved in, because whatever he was dealing with had now demonstrated that it was not confined to the walls of his house and was not getting quieter with time. If moving bicycles sound unsettling, the next video proves you don't even need objects to move across a room. Sometimes a simple curtain is enough. Natalia Costa is a woman from Brazil whose TikTok account has nothing to do with ghosts or hauntings or anything close to it. Scroll through her page, and what you find is ordinary, funny vlogs, quick clips of her day, the kind of content that fills most people's feeds without asking anything of the viewer, which is what makes the one exception so strange. Buried in her account is a single video, uploaded back in 2022, that stands completely apart from everything else she has ever posted, and it's the reason her name comes up at all in conversations about this kind of footage. The clip itself starts simply enough. Natalia is sitting in her living room, phone propped up in front of her, recording herself singing. The sort of casual, low-stakes video that gets made and forgotten by the thousand every day. There's nothing in the framing or the setup that suggests she expected to catch anything unusual. She's just singing, comfortable, looking straight into the camera. Behind her, a curtain hangs over the window. It sits still for a while, the way curtains do, and then it moves. Small at first, a twitch, barely enough to register. The kind of motion that could be explained away by a draft or an air vent kicking on. Natalia doesn't stop singing. If she notices, she doesn't show it, not yet. Then it happens again, and this time there's no mistaking it for something passive. The fabric jolts outward, hard, with the kind of force that looks less like air moving through a room and more like something on the other side has shoved it forward. Natalia's reaction is immediate. She stops singing, her eyes go to the window, and for a few seconds she just sits there, clearly deciding whether to keep filming or get up. She chooses to keep going, which is its own kind of remarkable, considering what happens next. The curtain moves a third time, and this one isn't subtle at all. It lurches outward violently, like something has thrown its full weight against it from behind, and that's the point where Natalia finally breaks. She screams and runs out of frame, leaving the phone recording an empty room and a curtain that's still swinging from whatever just hit it. What makes the footage hard to explain away isn't the movement itself. Curtains move, rooms have drafts. That much is ordinary. It's the moment right before any of it starts, when the curtain is hanging flat and undisturbed against the wall, and there is visibly nothing behind it. No shape, no outline, nothing pressed against the fabric that could account for what happens seconds later. Natalia has never posted anything else about that night. No explanation, no follow-up, no return to the topic in any video since. Just one clip, sitting alone on an otherwise unremarkable page, and a curtain that moved like something was standing behind it when nothing was there. If these clips have you questioning what's real, hit subscribe now, because the next 5 videos are even harder to explain, and one of them was recorded inside the largest cemetery on Earth. The previous video left viewers debating what was behind that curtain. The next family didn't want to guess, they decided to set a trap. A father and daughter who run a TikTok channel together had built their following around documenting strange and unsettling events that they claimed were happening regularly inside their home. Shadow figures, unexplained sounds, activity that neither of them could account for through any ordinary explanation. The kind of content that attracts an audience precisely because the question of whether it is real or constructed is one that viewers feel compelled to keep returning to. On this particular day, they decided to try to settle that question, at least for themselves and for anyone watching, by designing a test that would be difficult to fake. The specific phenomenon they were attempting to capture was a black shadow that had reportedly been appearing in the house, peeking around a doorway in a way that both of them had witnessed but had never managed to get on camera clearly enough to be convincing. The father explained the setup directly to the camera before they began. He had positioned his daughter Kay close to the screen so that the moment anything appeared, she could grab the camera and move it immediately to wherever the figure was, following it before it had a chance to disappear. The logic behind the approach was straightforward and genuinely difficult to argue with. The stairway where the shadow had been appearing had nowhere to go. No rooms branching off it, no space to slip away into, and anyone running up those wooden stairs would be heard clearly. If they moved fast enough with the camera and found nothing, that would be meaningful. If they found something, it would be captured in conditions that made staging it extremely difficult to explain. The father was convinced enough in the moment that something was already there, visible on the front screen of the camera, that the urgency in his voice when he called for Kay to move was not feigned. She grabbed the camera and ran it to the stairway exactly as they had planned. What the footage captured when she got there was 2 black shadows at the top of the staircase, their heads visible behind the wall, both of them facing directly into the camera, not a single shape or an ambiguous outline that required interpretation to see. 2 distinct heads, positioned in the way that 2 separate figures would be positioned if they had been standing there, watching the doorway below, and had not moved away in time before the camera arrived. The father and daughter pressed against the wall immediately, checking that nothing was flat against the surface behind it, confirming that there was no physical object positioned to cast that shape. There was nothing there. The shadows had no source that either of them could locate. It is a shame, as the father noted afterwards, that they didn't manage to get the full figures on camera before they disappeared. But two heads staring directly into a lens from the top of a staircase with nowhere to hide is not a detail that requires much additional context to be deeply unsettling on its own. That experiment didn't answer every question, but the next encounter happened outdoors, in broad daylight, with nowhere for anything to hide. A man's daughter was the first to notice it, spotting a silhouette out at the edge of the forest that bordered their property, and something about it was wrong enough that she didn't just glance past it. She kept watching, trying to work out what she was actually looking at, and the longer she stared, the less it resembled anything she could easily explain. It didn't move like a person, and didn't hold itself the way a person standing at that distance normally would, and that was enough to send her straight to her father. She brought him outside and pointed toward the tree line, trying to describe exactly where she'd seen it. "Somebody over there," she told him, and when he asked her where, she pointed again, more precisely this time. "Right here." He looked out toward the spot she was indicating, scanning the edge of the trees, and called out into the distance, asking whoever or whatever was standing there what they thought they were doing on the property. Nothing answered. The silhouette stayed where it was for a moment, visible enough on camera to register as something upright and roughly humanoid, but not with any of the details that would confirm it actually was human. There was no face to speak of, no clear texture to its shape, just a dark, still outline holding its position at the border of the trees while father and daughter watched from the yard. The man decided he wasn't going to simply stand there and keep watching the footage back, replaying the same uncertain moment over and over without ever getting closer to an answer. He started toward the tree line himself, moving with clear purpose and determination, plainly intending to close the distance and get near enough to finally settle the question of what it actually was, once and for all. But by the time he had crossed that distance and reached the exact spot where it had been standing only moments before, there was nothing there at all. No figure remained, no trace of a person having moved quickly through the brush in a hurry, nothing that suggested any obvious direction it might have gone if it had simply turned and walked away on its own. The ground offered no clues, the trees stood undisturbed, and the silence around him gave nothing back. Whatever had been there moments earlier had vanished completely, leaving him standing alone at the tree line with no explanation, no trail, and no answer to the question he had been so determined to resolve. What the camera did manage to catch before it vanished is what's kept the footage circulating. The shape itself, held on screen for those few seconds, has an unnatural quality to it that's hard to pin down exactly and eerie enough that it hasn't been easy for anyone watching to write it off as a trick of the light or a person who simply stepped out of view. The woman posts frequently on TikTok, and her account has built itself entirely around something that shares her home with her, something she can't see but has clearly learned to live alongside over time. Across her videos, an invisible presence moves through the rooms of the house, occasionally coming close enough to her that she stops what she's doing to address it directly. What sets her apart from most accounts covering similar ground is how unbothered she seems by all of it. She doesn't scramble to leave the room or shut the camera off. She talks to it the way someone talks to a difficult roommate, asking it, evenly, to leave her alone. That evenness only goes so far though. Across the footage she's posted, she's described the same sensation returning again and again. A cold, specific feeling settling behind her, and the sense of being watched by something standing closer than it should be, regardless of how many times she's already dealt with it before. In one of her more widely shared clips, her composure slips for a moment. She grows visibly frustrated, clearly recognizing the feeling as one she's dealt with before and not wanting to go through it again. She calls out into the house, addressing the presence by name, as though this is a conversation they've had many times already.
Not again, don't start again! Not!
Nothing responds in any way that's audible on the recording, but her reaction shifts almost immediately afterwards, her voice dropping into something quieter, more unsettled, the kind of tone that comes from having a suspicion confirmed rather than a new fear introduced. She turns the camera slowly toward the floor, and this is precisely where the footage becomes genuinely difficult to dismiss or explain away as imagination. Footprints, unmistakably human in shape, freshly pressed into the surface in the exact spot where she insists she felt someone standing only seconds earlier, as though whatever had been there had left its mark the moment before vanishing entirely. She moves in closer to get a better, more careful look, running the camera slowly and deliberately over the marks, clearly trying to catch any further movement or some indication of where whatever left them might have gone next. There is nothing else to find, no matter how closely she searches or how long she lingers over the area. No further prints leading away from that single spot. No trail suggesting movement toward a door, a window, or anywhere else within the room. No visible disturbance elsewhere in the space. Nothing knocked over, nothing shifted out of place, nothing beyond the marks themselves and the immediate area surrounding them. The footprints simply exist there, isolated and unexplained, appearing without any visible cause and leading nowhere at all, as if whatever made them had been present for only a moment before disappearing entirely, leaving behind nothing but that single, unsettling trace on the floor. The prints hold up under a closer look. They're not smudges, not dust kicked up by nothing in particular, but shaped enough like actual steps that they're hard to explain as anything incidental. Whoever or whatever left them isn't visible anywhere in the frame, then or afterwards. What exactly shares her house and what it wants from her have never been answered in any of her videos. The uncertainty is the one thing that stayed consistent across all of them. Strange things inside a home are disturbing enough, but imagine witnessing something similar while walking through the largest cemetery in the world, completely alone. A man in Iraq named Mayan, whose account doesn't typically lean into paranormal content at all. His day job is as a groundskeeper at the Valley of Peace, the largest active cemetery in the world, a burial ground with a history stretching back some 1,400 years and holding the remains of over 6 million people. Most of what he shares with his followers are simple night walkthroughs of the grounds, filmed to give people a sense of the atmosphere in a place that's already unsettling just by virtue of its scale and age. This particular night was different. Mayan can be heard on the recording repeating prayers under his breath, invoking God's mercy over and over, his voice shaking in a way that makes clear this wasn't a performance. He keeps saying it again and again, asking to be saved.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم دخيلك ربي بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم يا رب دخيلك بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم يا الله دخيلك ربي بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم.
The repetition itself becoming a kind of evidence for how genuinely afraid he was in that moment. At one point, he tells whoever might be watching that it's about to disappear, urging them to look now, to see it while there's still time.
اختفى والله اختفى هنشوفك النسوة هنشوف.
What the camera catches is a figure, low to the ground, moving in a crawling motion across the dirt path that cuts through the cemetery. It isn't a normal crawl. The motion is bizarre, deliberate in a way that doesn't map onto how a person or an animal would move across that kind of ground. And when the footage is zoomed in on, the shape resists any easy identification. Not clearly human, not clearly anything else either. Just a form making its way across the path with a rhythm to its movement that feels wrong the longer it's watched. Viewers who've gone through the footage in the comments have pointed to other supposed anomalies scattered throughout the clip, but a closer look at those particular claims doesn't hold up the same way the central figure does. Most of what's been flagged looks like ordinary shadow and terrain rather than anything genuinely unexplained. Walking through a burial ground holding 6 million dead is unsettling enough on its own without anything else added to it. Having something crawl across your path while you're there, moving in a way that doesn't belong to anything recognizable, is what pushed this particular night into territory Mayan clearly wasn't prepared for. One final video remains, and this one may be the hardest of all to explain. This clip comes from a man in Romania named Radu Kurila, whose account, like several others in this space, doesn't typically deal in anything paranormal. His feed is mostly ordinary, daily life updates, glimpses into his work running a construction crew, the kind of content that gives no indication his page would ever end up circulating for a reason like this. That changed one night when he got a call about a strange disturbance at a house his crew had been working on, unfinished and empty at the time, and he drove out to check on it himself. What he found once he arrived is what's made the footage spread. Looking up toward the front window on the second floor, two sets of eyes are visible in the dark, glowing faintly enough to be unmistakable against the black of the unfinished house behind them. It's their position that unsettles anyone who's watched the clip closely. They sit right at the very top of the window frame, high enough that whatever they belong to would have to be hanging upside down from the ceiling to be positioned that way, which isn't a detail easily explained by someone simply standing inside looking out. Then a figure appears more fully in the window, pale-faced, visible for only a few seconds at a time, its face seeming to light up and go dark again in a way that doesn't match anything as simple as a flashlight or a phone screen catching the glass. When the footage is zoomed in and enhanced as much as it can be, the figure resists looking human in any conventional sense. The proportions feel off, the features are blurred and distorted in ways that are hard to reconcile with an actual person standing at that window, and its movements carry the same unnatural quality throughout. What exactly was inside that unfinished house that night hasn't been settled by anyone who's seen the footage. Some have floated the idea of trespassers, maybe more than one person working together to stage something elaborate enough to unsettle whoever came to check on the property. Others aren't convinced that the explanation accounts for everything visible in the clip. Radu hasn't offered a firm answer either way, leaving the footage to speak for itself and the conclusion up to whoever's watching it. 10 videos, 10 people. None of them expected to capture something that would leave millions of viewers searching for answers. Whether these clips reveal genuine paranormal events, strange coincidences, or simply things we don't yet understand is a decision only you can make. If you've seen something even stranger or think you can explain one of these cases, tell us in the comments. And if you enjoy exploring the internet's most unsettling mysteries, subscribe and join us for the next investigation. Until then, keep your eyes open because sometimes the camera notices things we never do.